Chair recognizes Mr. Lynch for for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I have enormous respect for the chairman and the sponsor of this measure. I think, however, that we have different expectations of the result of what would happen if this bill were to go forward. In Massachusetts, I use our own example. We have an excellent, smart, hardworking Attorney General who handles this matter for us, along with our Secretary of State. And unfortunately, I think if this measure went forward as written, it would take our Attorney General and the other 49 Attorney Generals off the field, basically, off the battlefield, and they would no longer be helping us in this effort, as well as the Secretaries of State that carry responsibility in some states and our gambling commissions. So by preemption, it would take that whole state framework off the field. And to be honest with you, I would rather see a situation where we had cooperation between the FBI and our state gambling commissions, our attorneys general, and to use the combined resources of those offices to get at this problem. I think the end result of this legislation would basically be to push the gambling offshore, and that's what we have right now, and we can't reach it. And so I think it creates a more difficult problem. Again, I'd rather see the FBI's office working together with our state officials, state attorneys general, to get at this problem. And I think that would bring a better result. I also I know that some states are working very hard on this. I know that my colleague, Ms. Titus from Nevada, has put a lot of work on this. She's got some good experience on it, and I would say within this committee, within the Congress, she's probably an expert on this. So I think a good use of my time would be to yield what time I have remaining, at least these 3 minutes, to Ms. Titus of Nevada.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Lynch. Thank you for those compliments and for yielding, and I thank the chairman for allowing me to sit in on this committee. As I've heard the testimony, I've been pretty astounded that Mr. Campbell could come representing the FBI to talk about the problems of regulated Internet gaming and not be able to cite a single case in which it's been the problem or give us any statistics that indicate it is a problem. And Attorney General, how you can use the 10th Amendment argument to say that federal regulation gives you more states' rights is kind of jabberwocky to me. And also, I wonder if you're so concerned about somebody in South Carolina, gambling on a site that's located in, regulated by, and limited to Nevada, what you're doing to protect those teenagers with a cell phone in South Carolina from gambling illegally and overseas. But I'd really like to have my time spent by Mr. Liparelli sharing with us how our extensive background in regulation of gaming in bricks and mortar has helped us to develop regulation for online gaming and answer some of the questions where people say, well, if you're in South Carolina, you can gamble on a site that's located in Nevada. How, when you cross the line to California, those sites turn off. How we can regulate those sorts of things. Would you lay some of that out for the committee? And I would be glad to welcome any members of the committee to come to Nevada for a tour and a visit and see how this really does work.
Thank you, Ms. Tice, for the question. All of the gaming regulation that has been passed throughout the United States essentially have 4 tiers, and I think it's important to highlight those. It's the statutory framework, the regulatory framework, and most people understand those 2 tiers pretty well. What many people don't realize that below those tiers are a series of technical standards, and then beyond the technical standards are the interpretations of those technical standards by staff. So to represent that someone can anonymously play on a regulated Internet site is completely inaccurate. You have full-blown registration requirements that mandate people turn over Social Security numbers, personal identification, and by the way, all of their activity, all of their wagers, all of their deposits, all of their withdrawals, all of their head-to-head matches are all recorded within the system. So to suggest that regulated sites can operate in anonymity or without transparency, I believe is completely inaccurate. So in the case of illegal operators, that's very possible, and that's been part of my testimony, is you have this dichotomy of the illegal people that probably are exploiting customers in South Carolina, and I'm confident that they're exploiting customers in every state in the country. In the case of Nevada and New Jersey's probably a better example because they've adopted all forms of gaming, those same stringent technical standards and rules interpretations apply. So the technical people that are assigned to approve these systems, this is a privileged industry, and you don't just get your product approved because you submit it. The burden is always on the applicant to prove that their system meets the technical standards. So there's no free pass when it comes to deploying these systems.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Chair now recognizes the gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Walker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am conflicted to some sorts as far as gathering all the information today, being a big believer in the 10th Amendment and making sure that we continue to operate with the individual liberty that the states so guide us to do so, or that our founding fathers guide us to do so. I am concerned about some of the statistics that I'm running across in the past and doing some work, maybe some of our poor communities, if you will, even some of the minority communities. I was alarmed to find out that nearly 40% of all online gamblers make less than $50,000. In fact, 14% makes less than $25,000. Are you aware of those statistics? Any of you gentlemen, have you done enough? Or are you just now hearing that? Okay. 54% of all online gamblers are minorities, which obviously should cause us some concern because many of these wonderful people live in some of these poor communities. So I struggle with this, and I've got a couple questions I want to get to, but I do want to lay something out in my time here that's allotted to Mr. Lepparelli. Several news sources have noted Senator Harry Reid's attempt to place a provision in the omnibus in the spending bill that would bail Caesars Casino out of bankruptcy. Others have also reported on Caesars' need for more states to authorize Internet gambling so that Caesars can get more players on its New Jersey site. So the question is, so with the modified interpretation of the Wire Act, is this what we're talking about? I guess the bottom line question is, are we talking about helping bail out an unprofitable casino?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Walker. The interpretation of the Wire Act has been a question before 2011, and it remains a question now. That is one of the areas in all forms of gaming development where that question constantly is brought to the table. You have a situation now where you have old law that hasn't kept up with innovation. So the question of that, I think, is irrelevant to anything relating to any one company's ambitions. That interpretation of the Wire Act is the same interpretation today as it was yesterday, as it was in 2009, as it was in 2001 when we passed our law.
You may be correct. Time will tell. I can't imagine that Senator Reid would try to do that into the omnibus, but we'll see how that works out. Mr. Campbell, is there a federal agency that has the resources and personnel necessary to police a patchwork of state Internet gambling regulatory regimes, protect states that do not permit Internet gambling, and prevent the use of Internet casinos and lotteries for monies that are laundered or other criminal activities? Any information that you could speak to that?
Well, again, I think I would hearken back to statements earlier about the importance of the federal agencies, including the FBI, working with state and local agencies to identify where this illegal activity is occurring and combining resources to do so. I think a couple of cases that demonstrate effectiveness in that area, the Legends Sports case out of Oklahoma, which was a 10-year illegal gambling activity, over $1 billion, victimizing Americans involved in sports betting, and then also the Full Tilt poker sports case as well, where there was a seizure of over $500 million related to that as well. And of course, there were international ties to those cases. So I think it's important that regardless of the landscape, where the threat occurs and where illegal activity is occurring by whatever individuals or organizations, it needs to be a combined effort by many agencies to target that threat.
Okay, let me follow up. In your earlier testimony, I believe you mentioned something about the FBI may have an investigation involving online gambling and terrorism. Piqued my interest. So would you mind unpacking a little bit more about that case to the committee, of whatever you can share, and why the FBI may be looking into such matters?
Right, and we can provide you some more specifics on that in future, but that was an investigation involving an individual that was providing monetary support, and one of the methods for that was money laundering through online gambling. And so in regard to that particular threat, as the FBI pursues investigations and we're targeting our top threats, which could be within terrorism or transnational organized crime, we look for whatever tools those bad guys essentially are utilizing that can help promote their criminal activity to hurt Americans. So it certainly is a priority for us.
I'd like to have more time. My time has expired. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Walker. The chair now recognizes Mr. Liu from California for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Wilson, Mr. Klein, for your public service. Thank you for your testimony today, and I have no doubt you believe in your testimony. But I do need to point out that parts of your testimony were simply wrong when it comes to technology. Mr. Klein, you had testified essentially that any smartphone can be used for online gambling, and that's virtually impossible to pinpoint location. And then, Mr. Wilson, you said essentially that any smartphone can be used as a virtual casino. The notion that you can't pinpoint location is simply incorrect. Just look at your GPS next time on your smartphone. It'll tell you where you are relatively accurately. And if you have lots of folks who are using these devices, they are going to be able to do it within their own state, but not outside the state in terms of online gambling. When you look at their programs that these states have put in, they're relatively effective. So we have a video that we're going to show from one such geolocation company. It's called GeoComply. We're going to show it. It's about a minute and a half. And as it's queuing up, I want to note the notion that you have ordinary South Carolina citizens who are somehow playing a Las Vegas online casino has no basis in reality or fact. And that's because they can't access that. Las Vegas and Nevada will block these things, so will New Jersey. So we're going to show this one for GeoComply, which New Jersey uses, and if we want to run the video, that'd be great.
Today's high demand for online poker and casino, as well as regulators requiring licensed operators to only accept bets within permitted states, requirements for geolocation compliance are high, and regulations are tight. GeoComply are a licensed service provider in 100% of the regulated iGaming market, as well as verified and audited by leading testing authorities. Federal regulations such as UEGA shape the technical requirements by state regulators, which mandate pinpoint accurate data, as seen in this transaction, where GeoComply systems captured the player's location within meters of accuracy, just less than a mile from the excluded New York border, of every transaction processed. Regulations also require multiple data sources. This transaction shows GeoComply capturing IP, Wi-Fi, and GPS data. Although IP data is always collected, as a sole data source, it is considered vulnerable to millions of easy-to-use VPNs and proxies. Mandated spoofing detection identifies and blocks players' transactions associated with VPNs and proxies. Spoofing detection also verifies remote desktop software and virtual machines are not active during a gaming session. As displayed on the right side of this transaction, GeoComply collects and analyzes all running processes on a player's device to verify none can be used to tamper with location data. If the player tries to use a running process,
Thank you. My colleague, Mr. Mulvaney, earlier today asked, is there a less intrusive way to solve this problem? We just showed it to you. And there are ways to make sure that folks are not playing illegally. Now, is it possible that a very smart hacker could spend countless hours trying to hack into one of these systems? Sure, anything's possible. But then we've got much more to be worried about that hacker than if that person from South Carolina wants to play, for example, the Illinois State Lottery online. And then let me ask some questions for Mr. Liparelli. In Nevada, for someone to actually play online, they've got to give their name, their address, their driver's license, their bank account, a whole host of other information, correct?
That is correct, sir.
But if they walk in a brick-and-mortar casino, they can walk in, put $5,000 on black on the roulette wheel, win, and then walk out without giving their name or address or driver's license, correct?
They can do that, but the marketing department at the casino will more likely track them down and try to get that information
Right.
from them.
So let's say they win 1,000. Now, based on what you said earlier, it seems like with online regulated gambling, you have far more information on who it is, what their bank account is. So they, in fact, are not anonymous. In the same way we don't say online banking is anonymous, we don't say online stock trading is anonymous. This is not anonymous. This is almost the exact opposite. You have so much information about these people who are online gambling that this is exactly what law enforcement wants. And I do want to suggest that what, some of the witnesses are arguing today are essentially that South Carolina should decide what the other 49 states should do. That is wrong. That violates the 10th Amendment. And with that, I yield back.
Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Grothman.
Sure. First for Mr. Campbell, just hypothetically, do you think states should have the right to set the gambling policy within their own borders?
I really can't speak to that. Again, we simply pursue our investigations based on existing federal statutes. I would defer to our partners from the states in regard to that answer.
Okay. Well, I'll ask you all, and this is for any one of the four of you to step forward. I think the problem we address is a lot of states want to limit gaming. And they want to limit gaming kind of for the reasons that Congressman Walker said. They feel that it's something that takes advantage of the poor, people who, for whatever reason, have a weakness and results in messing up their lives financially. Now, the last question pointed out there's all sorts of information being gathered. Do any of you have anything that you would like to add to my last comment? I mean, in your positions, do you see people mucking up their lives because of internet gaming? Do you have any anecdotal evidence or real evidence you can tell me about? Any one of you four. Who's ever the most aggressive can go first.
I don't know if I'm the most aggressive, but we've seen anecdotal evidence in South Carolina through a lot of the sweepstakes situations we've had. We obviously had video poker back in the 90s. Anecdotal evidence, children were left in cars who died because the mother was in there gambling for hours at a time. I would like to, if I may, real quick, and I respect Mr. Liu, who gave the little video presentation. I'm not here today, and I confess I'm not prepared to litigate or debate whether or not what he put in that video is provable and defensible. But what I can say is that it is not a violation of the 10th Amendment when Congress has the authority to regulate online gambling under the Commerce Clause. For 50 years, the Wire Act enforcement and precedent has kept gambling out of the air and on the ground, where states could better regulate it, whether they prohibit it or regulate it or support it. When the prohibition was removed unilaterally by a lawyer at the Justice Department, they put it up in the air as well as on the ground where states can't regulate it as easily. Removal of the online gambling provision of the Wire Act has eroded the state's ability to prohibit or regulate however they want the gambling in their states. And so my comment to that is, if we don't pass RAWA and no one here codifies what was in that legal memorandum, then that legal memo amended federal law. They legislated from the Justice Department, and that is only something that this Congress can do.
As a practical matter, then, well, first of all, does any other folks have anything to say on my question? No. Okay. So I'm going to give you this question. As a practical matter, as this is left hanging out there, do you believe this is resulting in a significant increase in gaming in states whose public policy is probably to discourage that gaming?
Well, sir, I can take a stab at that. The legalization of online gaming in Delaware, Nevada, and New Jersey, there's lots of debate about whether those are overlapping players or not. I would tell you that the growth in online gaming on illegal sites occurred without respect to any policy position taken by any government official. It grew out of just the natural evolution of technology being exposed to patrons. So do I believe more people moved to mobile forms of gambling that were made available by illegal operators? I absolutely believe they did. That's why in our state and many of the people in our industry want to see that become what we traditionally support, which is forms of regulated industry that are subject to fair forms of taxation and oversight.
Okay, I'll ask Mr. Klein one final question. You're here today, and I assume you're here today because you have an interest in this topic. Anecdotally, in your state, has this loophole or new rule or whatever you want to call it, do you believe it has resulted in more gaming in Nebraska that wouldn't have happened otherwise?
Yes. Anecdotally, I will say that certainly we see people who have problems with gambling generally, your question earlier. But is there a greater propensity if people have access? Sure there is. And to your point, to the Congressman's point about geolocation, that's with regard to regulated areas. We're still not talking about the illegal gambling sites maybe in another country or whatever that people have Internet access to. And my understanding is this would give the FBI or the Justice Department the ability to go after those folks. We're still talking about the enforcement perspective about people who are doing illegal operations. And that's what we're looking to is how do we enforce the law? And we need a law to be there to be able to be enforced. Okay. You see what I'm saying?
Right. And I apparently, Nevada has the opinion that, you know, the more the better as long as it's regulated. But in Nebraska, you as a state view gambling as something that takes advantage of people's weaknesses, and you are familiar with examples of people's lives who have been.
We don't have casino gambling in Nebraska. There's casino gambling in Iowa, which is right across the Missouri River from Omaha. We have a multitude of cases, criminal cases that come out because of the issues that are caused when people go over and blow all their money in the casinos in Iowa.
It's Iowa. What can you expect?
Right.
Okay, thanks.
That's sure.
Gentleman's time has expired. The chair now recognizes the gentlelady from the Virgin Islands, Ms. Plaskett.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Ranking Member. And thank you, gentlemen, for testifying on this very important issue and attempting to give us some insight and clarification as to your interpretation of the import of online gambling and where, in fact, the line is clearly drawn. So I have an interest in this because in 2001, the United States Virgin Islands passed the Internet Gaming and Internet Gambling Act. And over the past decade, the government of the Virgin Islands has really been handcuffed by incorrect interpretations, they believe, of the Wire Act. And I believe that if the act was allowed to be implemented and regulated properly, much needed revenue might be brought to many different states that have this law in its place. So I was really interested in much more historical look back on how this came about. I've worked at the Department of Justice, worked in the Deputy Attorney General's office, and understand how long it takes for an opinion to come out of legal counsel, the Department of Legal Counsel. So the idea that this was drafted and written and signed in the middle of the night to me is somewhat a stretch of my imagination, knowing the inner workings of the Justice Department and how long it takes for an opinion to come out. So I wanted to look at the interaction between the Justice Department and Congress over the many years in which before that opinion was drafted. So Mr. Klein, I understand that in 2002 there was a case called In Re MasterCard in which the Fifth Circuit Appellate Court ruled that the Wire Act applied only to online sporting betting. Is that correct?
That's my understanding.
Okay, that's your understanding. And that the Fifth Court made that decision, that would have been 9 years before the Department of Justice's legal opinion, correct?
That's also my
Okay, and since then, during that time, 2009, even before that, Congress has weighed in pretty consistently on this issue up until now, that there seems to be some question about it. So, Mr. Wilson, were you aware that between 1996 and 2006, Congress passed a series of bills to update the Wire Act and made it clear that the act should not apply to online casino operators duly licensed by a state to offer casino games to people located in those states.
Into which, I'm sorry, which states?
To any state.
No, any
This was
state,
an act passed by Congress.
No, I'm not.
Okay, and were you aware that Representative Goodlatte in the 106th, 107th, 108th, 109th Congress offered legislation on this matter? Senator John Kyle, Representative Leach as well?
No.
Okay, and that even though none of these laws was enacted, the passage of those bills in both congressional houses gave a clear evidence that I would think that there is congressional intent on this matter. So in 2006, Congress enacted the only law that deals directly with Internet gaming. Are all of the witnesses, are you familiar with the Unlawful Internet Gambling Enforcement Act, otherwise known as UGIA? Are you all aware of that? I take that as a yes?
Yes.
Okay. I don't want to go into lawyer mode and, okay. Thank you. So I'd ask that the record reflect that all of the witnesses says that they're aware of that. And I have a slide that I'd like to show. Here's what UGIA said, that the term unlawful Internet gambling does not include placing, receiving, or otherwise transmitting a bet or wager where a bet or wager is initiated or received or otherwise made exclusively within a single state. And then it goes on to say the bet or wager and the method by which the bet or wager is initiated and received or otherwise made is expressly authorized by and placed in accordance with the laws of such state. And finally, and the state law or regulations include age and location verification requirements reasonably designed to block access to minors and persons located out of such state and appropriate data security standards to prevent unauthorized access by any person whose age and current location has not been verified in accordance with such state laws or regulations. Mr. Liparelli, is that the correct pronunciation of your name, sir?
Yes, it is.
Okay. I'm pretty sensitive to that myself. Is it clear to you from the reading of this law that Congress never intended to ban states from authorizing and regulating online gambling within their own borders?
The language debated in and around UGIA was intense, and I believe you're correct that that was the intent.
The final intent and what the language of the law itself says.
Yes, I do.
And so, Mr. Liparia, did the state of Nevada consider this language in drafting its own regulations?
It did, and I would remind the committee that we actually passed our state law back in 2001, so the adoption of UGIA actually was part of what informed our regulatory structure. The regulations are controlled by our Nevada Gaming Commission, so clearly they, at the advice of our Attorney General, considered the elements within UGIA when we adopted our regulations.
So this legislation, which was passed incidentally in a Republican-controlled Congress and signed into law by President Bush, that the department, were you aware that this was, this precise language of UGIA is what the Department of Justice Office of Legal Counsel utilized in determining that it was needed to update DOJ's position to conform with Congress and with the courts?
I believe that's correct.
Okay. I think that I have, in fact, run out of time. But I will ask that the record remain open, that I could put the rest of my testimony into the record.
Without objection.
Thank you.
Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Buck.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Campbell, are there other statutes that the federal government could use to prosecute the unregulated illegal online gambling?
Yes, that is correct. We use the Illegal Gambling Business Act, the Travel Act, various money laundering statutes, bank fraud, mail fraud, wire fraud, among others, in order to target that type of threat and, of course, organizations and individuals involved in that activity.
And what's the purpose of the Wire Act being used in this way, then?
I can only refer to the opinion itself and the Department's interpretation of the statute.
Are there any, is there evidence of any regulated entities using the gambling opportunities for money laundering?
I'm sorry, the regulated?
The online gambling?
Well, there is evidence of criminals utilizing those forums potentially for
Have you
money
prosecuted any
laundering
cases? Has the
activity.
Department of Justice brought any cases based on that theory?
I would have to refer to them and maybe provide some other information related to that. I'm not, as I sit here, I can't define specific cases involving the money laundering aspect.
And are there cases that criminals have used brick-and-mortar casinos to launder money?
Again, I'd have to refer back to provide you some more information regarding that.
Well, I can answer that one for you. I prosecuted some of those. So it's happened at brick-and-mortar casinos. Why would you need this statute then? Why couldn't you use other statutes to prosecute these cases if you can in other, in the brick-and-mortar situation?
Well, certainly, we are utilizing these various statutes. That's correct in regard to any criminal activity, illegal activity relating to gaming. That is correct.
Mr. Wilson, do you worry that if the Federal Government goes down this path, that the Federal Government could also go down the path of legalizing gambling in all states?
I mean, I suppose I haven't put much thought into them legalizing gambling. It's always been the policy of them to leave that solely within the purview of the states. That's always been the policy of the Congress, is give great deference to the states and how to regulate gambling. I don't see that changing, but...
Well, you're seeing a change now. I mean, we're having a hearing based on states' rights.
I'm seeing an erosion, yes, sir.
Okay. I yield back my time, Mr. Chairman.
Will the gentleman yield?
Yes.
Just to answer the question, I would like to ask unanimous consent to enter into the record Washington Post article. It's a little bit older, but it says 3 worked the web to help terrorists. One line from the sentence. Authorities also say the men laundered money from stolen credit card accounts through more than a dozen online gaming sites. Asking unanimous consent to enter that into the record.
So ordered. The Chair now recognizes the gentlelady from New York, Ms. Maloney.
I thank the Chair for calling the committee and for all of the panelists on this important issue, for being here today and testifying. I would really like to focus on the law enforcement aspect of this, and the National Fraternal Order of Police submitted a letter to the committee expressing their law enforcement perspective on regulating online gambling. And I'd like unanimous consent to place their letter in the record. And I'd like to quote from the letter. It says, quote, "It is imperative that states be able to reserve the right to create a strong regulatory framework to allow law enforcement to successfully protect consumers and to drive illegal operators out of the marketplace." So, Mr. Lipparelli, as you have experience in this area, would you agree that a strong regulatory framework for online gambling would support law enforcement efforts, consumer protections, and drive illegal operators out of the business and the marketplace?
Clearly, I believe that should be the priority of both state and federal law enforcement. This was an issue prior to our state's legalization and regulation of online gaming, and it only became more apparent once there were economic interests, quote unquote, in the game, where they themselves were able to analyze the impact of those operating illegally without paying taxes and registering customers without any form of serious confirmation. So clearly the answer to that is yes.
Okay, Mr. Campbell, I'm guessing or assuming that a strong regulatory framework aids the FBI's efforts if investigating a player or transaction related to a regulated online gambling operation or platform.
Well, certainly both statutory law and regulation can have an effect in regard to ensuring operators continue their operations within the law. That is true.
And Mr. Lipparelli, some states have concerns about the difficulty and cost of regulating online gambling within their state borders. Can you please share some insight from your experience in Nevada drafting the state regulations for oversight?
I can certainly speak to our experience in Nevada. I was chairman at the time we adopted these regulations, and at that moment in time, we added no new resources in terms of human capital to our agency. We did it within the confines of our existing staffing levels. It's an important question. There was, I believe, some cyber resources added in our just passed legislative session. I think the better question with regard to that relates to empowering law enforcement potentially in other ways to potentially go after, the illegal operators. There are state laws on the books today that clearly delineate those as illegal activities, so there are tools in place already, but if there's a desire to enhance that capability, you won't get any disagreement from me.
Okay. And how were you able to design a regulatory structure that was easy to implement the various oversight and enforcement aspects and manage their costs?
I don't want to represent in any way that it was easy. I would concur. I would also suggest that my colleagues in New Jersey at the time would probably also not call it easy. Any regulation of any new technology presents questions, concerns by the incumbent players, but this has been the hallmark of gaming regulations since the late 70s. In the 1950s, that foundation was laid, but beginning in the 1970s and after, when technology really started to affect our business, each and every time we've taken evolutionary steps. For example, slot machines used to be mechanical devices, then they became proprietary software written only by the people supplied that. Today, most of it's PC technology. That's an example of the evolution of the technology. Each one of those presents risks and uncertainties, but in each case, I think the gaming regulators have rose to the occasion, created the right technical standards, and often we overcorrect and then back off. So I wouldn't characterize any of the work that my colleagues have done over the years as easy. But they have great experience in doing it.
Well, do you think that Nevada's experience and Nevada's regulatory standards could be used as an example for other states?
Well, clearly I made those comments in my prepared remarks. If compliance is the goal, and if you talk to any regulator, that's always their desire, right? We want our regulated people to comply with the rules and the regulations. Anytime you diverge, having wildly different standards from state to state, that creates potential conflicts and issues. So to the degree that regulators cooperate, which they often do, the industry, the players, the state, everyone benefits from that. Wildly different standards can create issues, but generally speaking, many states, Nevada, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Mississippi, have all been very cooperative, and the independent test labs also contribute to that base of knowledge that says what's the most efficient way to regulate, what can create the outcome, and we're constantly at that effort. It never goes away. Every time a new piece of technology comes along, it presents new challenges, and I think the industry, to its credit, deserves praise for the fact that you don't see widespread scandal in our industry. I think that's something to be proud of.
I would agree with you. My time has expired. Thank you very much.
I now recognize myself for 5 minutes. One of my concerns is the harm that Internet gambling will cause, particularly for adolescents. There's numerous studies that indicate there's much higher rates of harm for adolescents. There's a much higher prevalence of disorders among adolescents as a result of gambling. Adolescent gambling is linked to deviant behavior. A few years ago, the National Academy of Pediatrics published a research paper and said that there's a pandemic of gambling addiction, not an epidemic, but a pandemic of gambling addiction among adolescents. And you talk about being able to control access across state lines. One of the things that I would like to explore here is what is the legal liability that parents might have for their children if they've gotten addicted to gambling or if they've spent enormous amounts of money gambling. Mr. Wilson.
I would argue that would be fact-specific. I mean, we have laws in South Carolina contributing to the delinquency of a minor, and obviously that would be fact-specific as to what the parent was doing in relation to the child, and were they putting him in that position, were they encouraging it? It's very fact-specific. But yes, it could actually exist in South Carolina where there could be some criminal liability on part of the parent.
How about civil liability?
I would argue, I'm not a civil attorney, but yes, I think you could have civil liability.
Well, there's examples of this already. The FTC won a $325 million settlement from Apple because the company billed consumers for millions of dollars of charges incurred by their children who were using mobile apps without their parents' consent. And one of my concerns is there's nothing to prevent a non-parent, even a non-family member, to give a minor access, to log on to an internet casino on the phone, give them the phone, or for them to get access to an adult's log-on information. And, when you're talking about if South Carolina didn't want it in South Carolina, but North Carolina did, is it the state's responsibility, North Carolina, to control that, or is that, is that going to be something that just has to be litigated in civil cases, or is there a criminal issue here? Mr. Wilson.
And I'm trying to understand the question, Mr. Chairman.
What are the limits? How does one state protect itself from another state that has introduced something that is clearly hazardous to people?
It is very difficult, and it is undefinable. I don't think that I have the balance of your time. I would have to eat that up and a lot more. I don't know how I could define that, but it would be extremely difficult to guard against that between interstate laws and policies.
Let me ask you this then, General Campbell. Should online gambling proliferate in the U.S., as it is expected to as a result of the OLC opinion, do you believe the burden of enforcing the newly established laws, and this is Mr. Campbell, I'm sorry, and regulations in multiple states will be a drain on your current resources?
We're still targeting the most significant threats, so regardless, we're going to commit the resources that we have available against those top threats, and where appropriate, partner with other state authorities.
Do you or General Wilson believe that the Department of Justice took into consideration the right of American families to keep online casinos out of their homes and off their children's cell phones and tablets and laptops?
I do not believe they did, no, sir.
Would you like to comment on that, Mr. Campbell?
Again, I would simply refer to the opinion itself and what's available there as far as the processes that went into the development of the opinion.
Should the government be in the business of facilitating such an activity? And I've been involved in this from a think tank perspective for years, studying this and looking at what happened in South Carolina when you had the proliferation of electronic gambling, video gambling. There were more places to gamble in South Carolina than there were in Nevada. It got to the point that the Manufacturing Association, the South Carolina Chamber of Commerce, joined with religious groups to get it out of their state. It got to the point that it was hurting economic development because companies didn't want to come in. And that's one of my concerns about this, is the proliferation of this and how it's going to impact not only families, but the ability to do business, the workplace environment. Those are some serious concerns that I think need to be taken into consideration as we go forward here. My time has expired. Would you like to respond, General Wilson?
Mr. Chairman, I didn't have the opportunity earlier. Representative Plaskett was mentioning UGEA, and I did not want, she ran out of time, and another member started talking, and I was respectful of the balance of their time. I want to just put on the record that she was mentioning UGEA may conflict with the Wire Act in allowing interstate gambling. I wanted to just go ahead and put on the record that the provision that she was referring to in UGEA is intrastate. It's a technical amendment put in UGEA that would allow retail lottery terminals or gambling terminals to communicate with a processing center somewhere within the same state. It wasn't an interstate gambling provision. It was intrastate, so it doesn't conflict with the Wire Act. That was all.
Thank you, General Wilson. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Missouri, Mr. Clay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Mr. Chair, I'd like to ask unanimous consent to enter 31 letters for the record supporting states' rights to regulate online gambling.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, along the same lines of questioning as Mr. Palmer, and this is a panel-wide question starting with Mr. Campbell, is there a foolproof method developed by the states or anyone else to prevent minors from online gambling? Is there an app? Is there a method that has been proven by each state, by a state or the federal government, that can detect the age of the participant at the online gambling site? And I'll start with you, Mr. Campbell.
At this time, I'm not aware of any particular technology that can specifically do that.
Okay. Mr. Wilson?
No, sir, I'm unaware of any technology, and I could probably bring an expert in here to contradict others.
Sure. Mr. Klein, are you aware of any?
I'm not aware of any.
Mr. Liparelli?
I have an affliction, having been in the industry for 20 years. The goal of gaming regulation is always to set the bar appropriately high. I don't think I haven't met that coder yet that can write perfect software. I wish I could. It would have solved a lot of headaches for me in the past. But generally speaking, operators, with respect to regulated online space, have set the bar unusually high. If the ambition of a gambler is to access a site and they're going to go through the panoply of requirements of a legal regulated site, they'll probably get to the second or third entry point in the site and move on back to their illegal site. So the quick answer to your question is there are outlets for those kinds of people to play today. Those are the illegal operators. The legal operators put in a panoply of requirements, and there's no guarantee that a minor could ever access a site. But generally speaking, the standards are quite high.
Now, you and I have heard the horror story of a minor getting a hold to maybe a parent's credit card and running up thousands of dollars worth of debt on these sites. And it's too late by the time the parent finds out about it. So, I mean, that happens. That actually happens. And it gives me pause and makes me wonder, do the states have a handle on the regulation of this type of online gaming?
Well, this is where I go into my, usually my commentary about that risk exists in all consumer businesses to the extent you're transacting, and gaming is really no different. The only argument I would make is that in the case of gaming, typically the standards that we require are significantly greater than what you would see in any consumer transaction out there. You can buy all kinds of things online, and it doesn't require any of the kinds of protections that our industry have put in place.
Sure, but it's easy for you to detect a person's age in a brick-and-mortar facility, which is how gambling originally got started in this country.
And there are prosecutions each and every year in the various states that allow brick and mortar for minors violating that law.
For sure, I'd just be curious as to how many prosecutions occur in the online aspect of gambling.
I know that the colleagues that I have talked to have told me that, and it was my concern when we adopted our regulations, in the conversations I've had with them as recently within the last 30 days, they do not cite that as an issue that's causing them distress. They have not been warned. They have not been told of horror stories of that kind of thing happening. So I can only go by what their personal experiences are that they've relayed to me.
Okay. Any other panelists have any anecdotal evidence?
This is very anecdotal, Representative. My 7-year-old is fond of hacking my iTunes account and downloading video games. I don't know what would stop him if he had a penchant for gambling on my iPhone, if I had an app on there. So that's more anecdotal than anything.
And probably with these new fantasy football leagues and all of that, I'm sure that that young people get excited about participating in that forum too.
Yes, sir.
Let me, I'll yield back, Mr. Chair.
Thank the gentleman. Recognize the chair. The intention of the chair to recognize Mr. Carter and then represent myself, and then we'll adjourn. Members are advised that there is less than 13 minutes in an extensively long vote series, and we'll go that direction. Mr. Carter, you're now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for being here. This is a great panel, certainly an important subject. Certainly all of us are interested in it. Mr. Campbell, let me start with you. Can you just briefly describe a casino-grade geolocation system to me?
No, I do not have information about that. I cannot provide information on that.
On a casino-grade geolocation system?
No, I am not familiar with that system.
Okay, okay. Well, let me ask you, are you aware that the Georgia Lottery Corporation conducts third-party penetration testing of their geolocation and age verification solutions? And this is very important to me. I know it's somewhat specific to my state, but the Georgia Lottery has been very successful, and by statute, all of those proceeds from that go to education. So we're looking at potentially losing $10 million in revenue directly to education. So that's why it's of concern to me.
Certainly, no, I am not familiar with the Georgia Lottery or its processes.
Okay. Senator, let me ask you, if we were able to control where online lottery sales can be done and the age of the person who purchases those tickets online, if we're able to control that, then how is it the Federal Government's problem? Why should the Federal Government be getting involved in it?
I'm not sure I'm totally tracking the question, but the states that establish their statutes, regulations, and technical standards, I have found over 20 years of experience, those local requirements, those local technical standards usually address the resident issues that crop up with those regulatory agencies. So in the case of an online lottery business, there will be particular requirements that may not be what you see in a traditional casino environment. So if there are specific elements related to lottery, I'm sure the lottery players in that game will contribute to very detailed debates on what should and shouldn't be included. In the case of lottery specifically, it's no different than what we saw with our online accounts. The one difference that they may decide to adopt is some of the registration requirements that we required in our state. That may not be the case, but that is one example that could bring greater transparency. But those tools are available, and they're getting better and better each day.
So the tools to be able to identify where the ticket is bought, where it's originating from, and the age, verification of the age of the person who's purchasing it.
I don't see the difference between any purchase transaction and any gaming transaction. It all comes in the form of complete tracking, so that I think those are very similar. As it relates to age verification, those will be continued challenges. There's more and more technology coming on board, but you probably shouldn't be able to register in the first place for an online transaction unless you've provided your identifiers, your personal account information, your access to whatever card you're using to transact. Again, building that wall as high as you can so that to the extent that a parent is going to then turn over that account information is no different than a parent being irresponsible in any other consumer transaction.
Okay. Well, gentlemen, my concern is this, okay? I don't want to lose $10 million in revenue to education. I mean, it's very, very important to us in the state of Georgia. It's worked well. And we feel like we're able to control where that ticket originates from, where that purchase originates from. We feel like we're able to control or to verify the age of the purchaser. So why come to Washington, D.C. and for me to say, no, I'm not going to allow you to do it if we're able to control that? Mr. Klein?
Yeah, what you're talking about is intrastate, I think, and what we're talking, I think, for the most part, is interstate issues with regard to gambling.
Well, let me get clarification then. Do you have any problem with intrastate?
I don't have a problem if Georgia has a lottery and they run it intrastate and they regulate it intrastate. Nebraska has a lottery also that we have intrastate, and we get the money goes to education. But I don't think that's not what I guess I'm talking about here.
Okay, okay. Just want to make.
Yeah.
Mr. Wilson?
We have a lottery too, Representative, and, absolutely have no problem with that. This is absolutely within the borders of each individual state. We're talking about cross-state borders, online gambling.
Fair enough. I just want to make sure because, quite honestly, I have concerns about that as well. But again, for the third time, I just don't want to interrupt something that is working so well in our state and that we feel like we have under control. So I just want to get clarification on that, okay? Mr. Chairman, that's all I had, and I'll yield back. Thank you.
Well, I thank the gentleman. Now recognize myself for 5 minutes. And the reason we're here is because the Office of Legal Counsel issued an opinion reinterpreting what had been in the books for more than 50 years. That's one of the issues that we're here for. There are some that believe that, and the other point I'd make is there are an untold number of gambling sites offshore. If you really want to gamble right now, you can go online and do it. It's against the law, but what the administration is talking about, what's showing up in this OLC opinion, which is one person's opinion, gives some to think that they have legal rights and reasons to bypass the states at the federal level and be able to offer their gambling sites in states across the country. Now, that poses a problem for a lot of states, states that have legalized gaming, states like myself who have no gaming, and don't want to have any gaming. And I think it's naive at best to think that you can put a wall on the internet and just say, hey, this is just, we're not going to be able to penetrate this. You can't, with gaming, there are lots of issues other than just location. Location is a big one. It's a core part of it. But it also has to do with your age. It has to do with your intoxication. It has to do with a whole host of things that can be addressed with somebody in person at a physical facility. And if an individual wants to, if an individual state wants to move this direction, and then look at the federal law. But I think we would both agree, certainly with the gentleman from Georgia, that you don't just unilaterally change the law with one OLC opinion. And the concern is being expressed here from a variety of different states is that this is a problem. There's a reason why the second highest, as best I can tell, revenue to the Department of Treasury through the Department of Justice on fees and fines is because of gaming issues. Now, a lot of that has to come with PokerStars and some of those settlements that skewed the numbers exceptionally high. But it is a problem, and we've had numerous attorneys general, numerous governors saying, you can't do that to our state. If somebody wants to come in and pass a piece of legislation and change the way we're going to do this, then introduce a bill and pass it. But what we're seeing now is the proliferation that is going to cause untold problems. Mr. Liparelli, I want to make sure that I'm just crystal clear. You're very nice, very competent. You represent your own personal views. You're not here representing the Nevada Senate, correct?
That is correct. That's why I made that
You're
statement
not
at the
here,
beginning of my testimony.
You're not here representing the gaming board in Nevada.
That is correct.
And it's very interesting to me, at least with the piece of legislation that I sponsored, the wide array of support on both sides of the aisle. On the one hand, in the Senate, you've had support from Dianne Feinstein and Mike, from Senator Graham to Kelly Ayotte to, I mean, you've got a whole host of people, myself and Tulsi Gabbard in the House. You've got a people from really the full political spectrum here that are saying this is a problem, we do need a bit of a timeout. But Mr. Liparelli, let me go back to your, I'm not sure I'm following your logic here. You are arguing, you have said, quote, we can all agree that a world with 50 state-specific standards would be a nightmare, correct?
I made that reference with respect to the technical standards.
So do you want a national gaming board? Is that what you're asking for?
No, it comes down to the possible versus the desired state. The desired state.
So are you advocating that you should be able to do gaming, the residents of Nevada should be able to gamble on the Georgia State Lottery?
No, I'm not at all. That's controlled by Georgia law and Nevada law.
but why wouldn't the resident of Las Vegas be able to gamble on the Georgia lottery site? Why wouldn't you advocate for that?
Well, the state law applies. I would agree with you, if there is a national acceptance, or if there's a willingness, and we've actually been in these chambers before looking at the prospect of interstate online gaming. There were a lot of potential arguments for why that didn't pass, and what were some of the impediments that got that going. But today in Nevada, they define their gaming law. Georgia would define whatever forms of entertainment or gaming they want to define, and it doesn't necessarily hold that as a result of that we should just have a national policy that says everybody can gamble on each other's various state laws back.
So you're okay with online gaming as long as it's on an online gaming site within your state under your regulations?
Right, or if there's a willingness among various states to cooperate and enter into common contests. I wouldn't object to that if those states desired to do so.
So if you teamed up, because the majority, right, 47 of the states, they don't have this, they're not participating in it. You're okay with compacts that would then regulate this?
I am.
And then you could essentially create national gambling. You think that that's an avenue to go. And who would regulate that?
The question about compacts has been addressed, at least in its first iteration, with the connections between New Jersey, Delaware, and Nevada. I was a part of that process before I left the Gaming Control Board, and the prospect that states could come together, similar like they come together in the form of lottery, set common standards that seem to be addressing the common issues between those states.
And Mr. Campbell, how are you going to enforce an expansion of gaming online? How many resources, as he was asked earlier, how many resources you can allocate to this, but if somebody in Nevada has a problem with the state in Delaware, who's going to enforce that?
Well, again, as we go about our intelligence and information gathering, we assess for the most serious threats that we would target that could be related to online gaming, from support to terrorism or transnational organized crime and so forth. And then again, as we do always, that's how we would dedicate our resources and potentially incorporate the state and local authorities in that effort as well.
Mr. Lipparelli, you have been quoted as saying that New Jersey should not be permitting PokerStars to return to the U.S. market. Why did you take that position?
I don't think I ever took that specific position. The position that I took vis-a-vis PokerStars and other companies like them who had entered the U.S. marketplace in violation of state laws, including my own in Nevada, was they should stand for suitability just like every other applicant. If they can survive that scrutiny and they can have an appropriate answer, it's for each one of these regulatory boards to decide whether that's a suitable method of operation, that if they were here before and settled their differences with the Justice Department to the tune of hundreds of millions of dollars, I think every gaming commission chairman or every board member that authorizes licenses should take that into consideration.
You said, quote, essentially trading, you said, your quote regarding PokerStars is you're, quote, essentially trading their credibility away. You might as well not have a licensing process, end quote. So you've changed your position since then?
I take exception to the term PokerStars. What I made in that comment was, if the bar would be set so low by licensing boards to ignore the kinds of activities that PokerStars was engaged in, then yes, I think there is a real question as to the validity of licensing if that kind of activity is allowed.
Okay. I have gone past my time. We have 0 time on the clock with 300 people who have not yet voted on the Cole amendment on the floor. I want to thank you all for being here. You offer an interesting perspective, the local region, the state perspective, the federal law enforcement issues. I do appreciate all of you being here. This is an important topic. It's something that is permeating the United States. It's on a lot of people's minds. There are various pieces of legislation in both directions out there. And I do appreciate your participation. It was good hearing today. At this point, the committee stands adjourned.